There is a moment when the world becomes too loud, not in volume, but in weight. The texts pile up, the conversations demand answers, the expectations multiply like reflections in opposing mirrors, endless and inescapable. And somewhere inside, a quiet door closes. You feel it happening, the pull inward, the retreat, not dramatic, not announced, just a soft stepping back from everything that once felt manageable. People call it shutting down. They call it avoidance or being distant. But those who live inside this pattern know a different truth. Withdrawal is not weakness. It is the nervous system's last attempt at survival when everything else has failed to protect you. If this perspective resonates, you can support the video by liking it. To understand why some people withdraw when overwhelmed, you must first understand what overwhelm actually does to the brain. Imagine your mind as a circuit board. Each interaction, each decision, each emotional exchange sends a current through the system. Under normal conditions, the circuits handle the load. But when too much flows through at once, when there is no pause, no rest, no quiet space to reset, the system begins to overload. Neuroscientists call this cognitive overload. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation, becomes flooded. It cannot process the volume of information coming in. And when the brain detects this overwhelm, it does what any intelligent system would do. It shuts down non-essential functions to preserve itself. What looks like coldness from the outside is actually protection from the inside. The person who stops answering texts is not being rude. Their brain has entered a state where even the smallest interaction feels like lifting a mountain. The person who cancels plans at the last minute is not unreliable. Their nervous system is screaming for solitude because it cannot regulate itself in the presence of more stimulation. This is not a choice. It is a biological response to prolonged stress. Studies in stress physiology show that when cortisol levels remain elevated for too long, the body begins to prioritize survival over connection. Socializing, explaining, performing normalcy, these all require energy. And when the tank is empty, the mind retreats to conserve what little remains. Comment retreat if this describes your experience. But there is another layer beneath the biology, a psychological pattern that often begins in childhood. Many people who withdraw when overwhelmed learned early that their emotions were too much for the people around them. Maybe their parents could not handle their sadness, so they learned to cry alone. Maybe their anger was punished, so they learned to bury it until it turned to silence. Maybe their excitement was dismissed, so they learned that joy was safer kept inside. Over time, these children develop a belief that becomes the foundation of their adult lives. When things get hard, I am on my own. This is not paranoia. This is adaptation. Psychologists call it emotional self-reliance. It is the psychological armor built by those who discovered that asking for help often led to more pain than staying silent. So they stopped asking. They stopped reaching out. They learned to carry everything alone. And when the weight becomes unbearable, they do not collapse outward. They collapse inward, retreating into themselves because that is the only place that ever felt predictable. There is a loneliness in this pattern that is difficult to name, because the person who withdraws is not necessarily alone. They might have friends, family, people who care. But when overwhelm strikes, none of that matters. The mind cannot access connection when it is flooded. It is like trying to have a conversation while drowning. The lifeline is there, but you cannot reach for it, because all your energy is spent just trying to breathe. And so you sink quietly, hoping that stillness will bring the surface closer. Type YES if this helped you understand something about yourself. What makes this harder is the shame that follows, because society does not understand withdrawal. It sees silence as rejection. It sees absence as abandonment. Friends feel hurt. Partners feel shut out. And the person who withdrew, already exhausted, now carries the additional weight of guilt. They know they are hurting others. They know they should explain, but explaining requires energy they do not have, so the cycle deepens. Overwhelm leads to withdrawal. Withdrawal leads to misunderstanding. Misunderstanding leads to isolation. And isolation confirms the original belief that started it all. When things get hard, I am on my own. This is where the psychology becomes complex, because withdrawal is both protection and prison. It shields you from overstimulation, yes, but it also prevents the very connections that might help regulate your nervous system. Human beings are wired for co-regulation, meaning we calm each other, a safe presence, a gentle voice, a person who does not demand but simply sits beside you. These can help the overwhelmed brain find its way back to balance. But when you withdraw so completely that no one can reach you, you lose access to that healing. The tragedy is that the people who most need connection are often the ones who have learned to survive without it. And survival, while impressive, is not the same as living. If someone you know might benefit from this, feel free to share it. Yet beneath this pattern lies something worth honoring. Because people who withdraw when overwhelmed are not fragile. They are some of the most emotionally resilient people you will ever meet. They have learned to hold themselves together when everything inside is breaking. They have developed an extraordinary capacity for self-soothing, for sitting with discomfort, for enduring silence that would unravel most others. This is not a flaw. This is strength born from necessity. But strength, when it becomes the only option, can turn into isolation. And that is where awareness becomes essential. Because recognizing the pattern is the first step toward changing it. Not eliminating withdrawal completely, that may never be realistic, but softening it. Learning to reach out before the overwhelm becomes total. Learning to say, I need space, instead of disappearing without explanation. Learning that asking for help does not erase your strength, it honors it. If this gave you clarity, comment space below. The people who withdraw are often the ones who feel everything most intensely. They are not numb, they are overflowing. And when the world keeps pouring in without pause, retreat becomes the only way to stop the flood. They are not running from life. They are trying to survive it, and perhaps that is the deeper truth beneath all of this. Withdrawal is not the absence of care. It is care turned inward when the outer world has become too sharp to touch. So if you recognize yourself in these words, know this: your need for solitude is not selfishness. Your silence is not cruelty. You are not broken for needing space when everything becomes too much. You are simply human, a human whose nervous system learned to protect itself the only way it knew how. And while that protection served you once, maybe now it is time to ask if there is another way. Not to force yourself into constant connection, but to allow small moments of reach. Small gestures that say, I am still here. I am just holding myself carefully. Because the world needs people who feel deeply. It needs those who retreat not from weakness, but from wisdom, who understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step back, breathe, and remember that solitude is not the same as abandonment. It is simply the space where you meet yourself again. If this resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, and let me ask you this. When you withdraw, what do you most wish others understood? Leave your thoughts below. And if you want more reflections on the psychology of being human, subscribe. This channel explores the quiet truths we rarely speak aloud.